Hello and welcome to Sòrò, sókè. This is a podcast where we aim to learn and demystify African lives and African people. Today I have Sòrò, which I've been following your Instagram for a while, and so I just had to approach you. She's quite active on there speaking about what's going on in Sudan, which I really believe that everybody should know at least the basic of it, and what's going on is very important. And so I wanted to invite her on today to kind of just give you a brief overview, highlight of what's going on and why you should pay more attention to what's going on in Sudan and kind of learn from there. So please, Sarah, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Zaynob. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. My name is Sòrò Hassan, and I've been covering the war in Sudan for the last 401 days. It's a task that I've taken on reluctantly because just the complete lack of coverage, particularly towards the beginning of the war, about what's happening in Sudan, specifically about what's happening to the people, right? I think the coverage that's come out has been largely about the two warring factions and about sort of the political aspect of things rather than the sheer humanitarian disaster that it created. And so I've just been trying to fill the gaps for the last 400 or so days. And yeah, that's basically me. I'm originally a freelance writer and editor. And it's not really, I don't have a journalism background or anything. I'm just a Sudanese citizen who was really concerned of what was happening in their country and the fact that nobody knew about it.
So I wanted to ask to start from a past, I guess, stance, and just kind of, I want us to learn about Sudan as you remember it, like prior, like the good old days. Kind of, can you give us like a brief summary of what the Sudan you know is like?
Yeah. Sudan to me is a country with a lot of potential, with a lot to offer culturally, naturally, in terms of resources, but also in terms of the people. I think as Sudanese people, we have been known in various parts of the world as being people who contribute a lot to the societies that we live in. We're big on education, and we've been impactful in education in different parts of the world as well. We're very communal people. We're very much about one another and about community. And that's something that I think is found in almost every Sudanese person on the planet, regardless of whether they grew up in Sudan or not. And it's one of the things that we pride ourselves on, right? This idea of community and togetherness. That's something that's really, really important to us. We're very diverse culturally, something that is a big badge of pride, in my opinion. Unfortunately, it's been used and skewed in ways that it shouldn't have been throughout our history, but it's something that is really one of the more beautiful parts of our country. The fact that we have, 500 or more tribes, 400 or more languages that are in Sudan. So many different cultures, so many different customs, so many cultures that feed it or sort of are fed into by neighboring countries, right? But yeah, I mean, there's so much to say about Sudan. And one of the things that makes me so sad about this war and about doing the work that I do, to raise awareness about the war is that unfortunately I am bringing Sudan to people for the first time in this context. And I hate that. I hate that people, don't know anything, don't have a frame of reference beyond suffering and death, and that's a huge thing because, we were talking about this before we started recording, the fact that you created this podcast to sort of reflect African experiences and African history and talk about things from an African perspective. And I think Sudan is, like many other countries, one of those countries that's been heavily affected by the preconceived notions of the world about Africa. when I started talking about this and people started paying attention, I started talking about it on April 15th, 2023. And that's not the first time that I had like reflected what was happening in Sudan to a large audience online. I mean, I covered the revolution before that, in 2019, and the same issue happened where people couldn't grasp the significance of the event or the significance of the moment because to them, yeah, it's another African country in turmoil. Like, what's
Yeah,
new, right?
that's.
And
I feel like they don't know Africa in a new light, in a different light. So when you
mm-mm,
bring that to them, it's like, yeah, isn't that what happens in Africa? They're fighting each other all the time. So it's
yeah, yeah, it's unfortunate, right? We have so much to offer, so much of of the beauty of our continent, of our countries, is overshadowed by these preconceived notions, by this idea that Africa is always a place that needs help, that is never a place that can help itself. And like, that's by design as well, right? This idea that we are constantly in the lower position, the position of somebody who can't do for themselves. That serves a purpose for those who want to exploit us, but I don't want to go off on a tangent. So I'll just say that, part of what I do now has been to actively inject some parts of aspects of Sudan or aspects of Sudanese culture that have nothing to do with the school, like talking about music, like talking about art, talking about customs and movies, like uh, all of these things, just to give people a sense that you're just looking at one facet of our lives, right? It's a horrible one. It's one that you should be paying attention to, but in order for people to care, they have to see a well-rounded, a three-dimensional image of a person, right? Otherwise, it's just pity, and there's no real human connection there. If they're just looking at disaster, then they just feel obligated to care in heavy quotation marks because that's what you do, right? But it's not because you actually feel a real human connection to that person. So I think um, showing Sudan, and that's why I really appreciate you asking this question first, right? The things that we love about Sudan, the things that we remember about Sudan that have nothing to do with this war. So yeah, to me, it's family, it's community, it's art and culture, and it's also those uniquely Sudanese things that I couldn't explain. That to me is really what I cling on to most in these times. We're very humorous people. We are very, very funny. I think like many other people across the African continent, we have a unique sense of humor, a very sharp sense of humor. Um, and that's something that's really been carrying us through in these times, even in the worst. I mean, even in the worst of what we've experienced, we always find a way to make, not to make light of it, but to find the levity, some levity in order to survive. So yeah, those are some of the things that I guess that I like. Sorry for the long-winded answer.
No, no, honestly, I loved it. I loved it. And I even don't want to move on to kind of like the present time because I just
Hmm.
you can see the joy in your face when you love what you do and you can like tell this is our first conversation, but literally I just
Yeah,
want to go on and just like you can tell that you love obviously you don't want to do it, but you feel the urge and the honor to bring the story out because like people must know.
definitely.
So yeah, thank you so much for doing what you were doing because like nobody asks you to do it. You just feel like you need to. So kind of like say I've never heard of any of the conflict in Sudan. And I know we
Hmm.
don't have much time and you can't really go into that deep detail. But as a listener who has never heard of any of the conflict, how would you kind of start and explain it to them what is going on in Sudan?
Okay. I think to make it as brief as possible, obviously Sudan has uh, a long history, right? A long history not only of colonization, but before that, right? I even say this in a lot of the videos that I make, like, I could never give you a full picture
Yeah.
of what's happening and where we are today. Like at some point, people have to go off and engage their curiosity and do their own research on Sudan, on its history, culture, all of that stuff, right? But to make it as brief as possible, I would say Sudan is a very diverse country that unfortunately, under different waves of colonization, has been sort of segregated and separated and fragmented. And that was never really repaired, even after independence. Sudan gained independence in 1956. And we never really were able to repair that fragmentation, right? We were never really able to create a national unity. And so those cracks in our foundation just got wider and wider as time went on. I won't get into, successive military dictatorships or any of that. I just want people to know that throughout our history, post-independence and pre, Sudan has always been fighting for its freedom. Sudanese people have always been fighting for their freedom, right? We've had successive revolutions that have culminated, I think, in the 2019 revolution. That's the starting point that I think some people who are more aware of Sudan would recognize, right? That point in time. 2019, Sudanese people came out in a non-violent, peaceful revolution that overthrew 30-year military dictator Ahmed al-Bashir. And this whole time we were fighting for three things: freedom, peace, and justice. Freedom from military rule, right? Sudan has been a militarized state for a very long time. Peace. Sudan, again, one of the things that Sudan is famous for, unfortunately, is war, right? The Darfur War was something that people, or the Darfur conflict as it's known globally, is something that people immediately recognize. Even if they don't know anything about Sudan, they know Darfur. And so, peace was one of the main demands of the people of Sudan when they came out in protest. We don't want war anymore. We want to live in peace across the country, right? And justice, right? For 30 years, we've been oppressed. Marginalized communities have been even more so oppressed, killed. Wars were waged against them, whether in Darfur or in the south, that led to South Sudan gaining its independence and becoming its own country. But essentially, we want justice for all those things that have happened to us over the last 3 decades, right? So that we may be able to rebuild. Because without acknowledging, taking accountability for those crimes, and having some sort of reconciliation within our society, within our own people, we cannot move forward. And unfortunately, that didn't happen. The revolution was successful in overthrowing Ahmed al-Bashir, but it was not successful in overthrowing the militarized state. And so, you had a period from 2019 to 2021 where there was power sharing between the military and a civilian political force, that was supposed to be, shared between them. So half of the period would be led by the military, half of the period would be led by the civilians. And when it came time to...
By the
Go ahead.
civilian political force, do you mean like literally a bunch of civilians put themselves together and said, we'll elect you as leader? Okay, right.
Yeah, so what happened was, the revolution is very much a grassroots effort, right? Nationwide. You had an organization called the Sudanese Professionals Association. That's the one that sort of came to the forefront as being this grassroots leader for the people. They sent out the, statements to call people to protest. They were sort of speaking for the people during this time before al-Bashir was overthrown. And then that turned into the Forces of Freedom and Change. That was a political coalition of like this Sudanese Professionals Association, but also other political parties and civil society organizations, all sorts of members of of society that came in this political coalition that now became the political representation of the people protesting on the street, right? And so towards the end of 2019, August 2019 is when they signed an agreement with the military saying, okay, we'll have this transitional period where we both share in the governing of the country. And after this transitional period, during this whole time, we'll pave the way for elections. So these two then turned into 4 years. These 4 years, say, of a transitional period will make way for elections, and people can elect their own president, their own leaders, their own parliament, all of that. Except the military didn't really want to, and was not acting in good faith, right? They didn't really want to let go of power. Over the last 30 years, the military has been deeply entrenched in all facets of Sudanese life. I mean, private companies, social clubs, they owned properties. The military was everywhere, right? So how do you dismantle that? That it takes a long time. And I think once an institution becomes that used to being the center of power for that long, and they've benefited greatly. I mean, they as in individuals, leadership has benefited greatly, personally benefited from being in power like that, right? All of these deals that Sudan has, as a government, has made with other countries, right? Whether it be with the Gulf countries for agricultural land, leasing out agricultural land for literally 100 years, businesses, investments, all of that came through the military and this upper echelon of power, right?
So
So,
when you
yeah, go ahead.
say like the army, is
Mhm.
this like the national army?
Yeah,
So this is from the government. So is the army
this is
government,
the
can you
national
say
army.
that, are they basically the same at that stage? The government and the army.
Yeah, at that stage, they were the same. For the last 30 years, they have been the same. Ahmad al-Bashir was a field marshal in the army. He came in through a military coup. It is a military government, right? They are one and the same. Coming now to all of a sudden having to relinquish power and also face accountability for all of the corruption, all of the crimes against the Sudanese people that you've committed over the last 30 years of having complete impunity and complete control over Sudan. That was something that they just could not contend with. And so we saw in the period between 2019 and 2021, you know, nothing was really changing. There was a lot of infighting between the civilian part of the government and the military. Anyway, all of that, fast forward to 2021, the military decides, this is like 2 weeks before they're supposed to hand over power to now a civilian-led part of the transitional period. They say, oh, sorry, we can't hand over power. We're actually going to keep ruling, and we're actually going to fire all of you and imprison some of you, because it's a national security issue, right? We're afraid there's too much fragmentation within us. There's not enough agreement. And if we let Sudan continue in this path, we're gonna go into all out war. And so in order to avoid that, the military is going to be the father that's going to take over everything, to make sure that they called it a, correction of path, right? We're doing a redirection. And this is something that Sudanese protesters, revolutionaries on the ground who were protesting the entire time. I mean, protests have not stopped from 2018 when the revolution began all the way until a day or two before the war began. This whole time, people are consistently protesting, consistently warning that the military is taking too many, it's taken over too much, that they're not to be trusted, that they're not going to hand over power. And through the coup, the revolutionaries were proven right. And then after the coup, revolutionaries were saying this has to be stopped, right? And the military is, again, not to be trusted, because international powers were also being like, oh, well, if you just, negotiate with them, or okay, let's just work on the election separately while they rule, and we'll get to that point. They weren't really taking the revolutionaries seriously. They weren't taking the voices of people on the ground seriously. There was a lot of sort of, you don't know what you're talking about because 90% of the people on the ground are youth, right? I think something like 75 or 80% of Sudan's population is within the youth bracket. And 90% of the people who are protesting daily are youth. And they're the ones saying, hey, you guys, this is not safe. These people are not to be trusted. They are not acting in good faith. And unfortunately, nobody listened to them. Now, while this is happening, we're talking about the military institution. Here, there are two factions in the military institution. There is the Sudanese military, the Sudanese armed forces, what everybody hears me refer to as SAF all the time. And then there is the Rapid Support Forces, which is the RSF. This is sort of a paramilitary force that was created by Omar al-Bashir to fight the war in Darfur. They were initially the Janjaweed, which are just basically roaming bandits that were contracted by the Sudanese government to fight in Darfur and other places after that. And then in 2013, to quote unquote reward them for the crimes against humanity that they committed in Darfur, Omar al-Bashir turned them from the Janjaweed to the Rapid Support Forces. They were sort of like, at the time they were called a border patrol, right? Just to give them some sort of official title. He called them a border patrol, named them the Rapid Support Forces, and their leader, Hemeti, leader of the Janjaweed, became their commander-in-chief, right? There is an excellent interview that Sudanese journalist Ni'am al-Baghir did with Hemeti before he became leader of the Rapid Support Forces, when he was still leader of the Janjaweed, that I have pinned in one of my highlights in the called Sudan Resources that people should absolutely check out, just to understand where this force comes from and how this person thinks. Right? He is a brutal, brutal man, and we see that brutality being carried out every day over the last 401 days and before. This brutality has been carried out in Darfur for 20 years, right? Now going on 30 years. Anyway, so these two forces are together. Technically, the Rapid Support Forces is under the military umbrella, right? The umbrella of the Sudanese military. But really, they're acting on their own. They are, at this time, between 2013 and 2019, they're making money. They're being contracted by Saudi Arabia and the UAE to fight the war in Yemen. They're being contracted by the EU to quote unquote curtail migration into Europe, right? So this is where their like border patrol thing comes in. But really they were terrorizing African migrants, preventing them from making their way into Europe. And they made, massive amounts of money, right? They also had control of gold mines. Sudan is very rich in gold. They had control over gold mines. So they're getting rich this way, right? They have deals with Russia's Wagner. They're they're paramilitary, military company Wagner. So they're being armed by Wagner. They're being funded by the EU. They're being, they're making lots of money. Come 2019 in the revolution, Hemeti decides to present himself as statesman, right? And I think, a lot of people have made this argument. Sudanese activists, political thinkers have made this argument that the West was trying to prop him up as the replacement for al-Bashir. That he was, he got a contract with a Canadian PR company, sort of whitewash their image and make him into this well-spoken, calm, collected statesman figure. During the transitional period, he was together with, Al-Burhan, leader of SAF, was the president, we'll say. There was no president, but for all intents and purposes, he was the president of Sudan, vice president being Hemeti. When they enacted the coup in 2021 and did away with the civilian portion of government, then it became just between them. And that's when the tension started to really show itself. Each one wanting to be over the other. But by this time, Hemeti had made so much money and had such a strong position that it became impossible to deal with him as just secondary force. Now he is big contender, right? And that tension eventually grew into the war that we see today. Some people claim that on April 15th, that those first shots on April 15th were by the RSF, and it was a coup attempt to overthrow al-Burhan and take over, for the RSF to take over as leaders of Sudan. I personally don't have any confirmation of that, but that is an argument that many people have made. And it's been going on for now 400 days of them fighting within each other to be sole controller of Sudan. SAF claims that they are fighting this militia, right? Even though they were partners on April 14th, 2023, now on April 15th, they become enemies. The rapid support forces that were previously a government sanctioned force, part of the greater military institution, one that was defended by the military institution over the period from 2018 to 2021, or actually 2023, I should say. This whole time when people are protesting and saying they want to dismantle the RSF. This was also one of the demands of the revolution. We want to dismantle the RSF. It is a terrorist militia. They have been terrorizing Sudanese people since 2003. We don't want them around anymore. They should not be part of the military institution. And then Burhan personally would come out in public statements and defend the rapid support forces. Right? And so now all of a sudden we're supposed to just divorce between these two. Now they are a rebel militia that we have to eradicate. That's SAF's narrative. And on the other end, the RSF's narrative is, well, we're here to defend the revolution. Those people, those are the remnants of the Bashir regime. Those are the people who you guys revolted against in 2018 and 2019. We're just here defending Sudan's right to democracy. We are bringing democracy to Sudan. That's their argument. And that has been their argument since 2019. I mean, you got to give it to them. Their PR machine worked very hard. And unlike SAF, unfortunately, SAF is very much like old world, sort of boomer mentality in terms of addressing the people and addressing the world. But the RSF has a very strong PR machine backing it that speaks to the world primarily, first and foremost, to the outside world before Sudanese people, right? Telling them, hey, these people, you know them, the Islamist government, that's who they represent. We represent democracy and the way of the West, right? And so it's easy to fall sort of victim to their propaganda if you don't know better. All that to say that Sudanese people are in a very precarious position because on the one hand, we revolted, we protested, we died. People sacrificed their lives. People sacrificed being in Sudan. Some people were exiled. Some people have long-lasting trauma from the revolution, all for freedom, peace, and justice from all of these factions, from the military and from the RSF. And now we are the primary victims of both the military and the RSF. A lot of people will disagree with me on this, right? That SAF is protecting the people in this context. And so we should support them. But it's very hard to support an institution that has always terrorized its own people. And even now within this year of war, we see a lot of things, a lot of decisions that SAF is making that don't make sense. So anyway, all that to say that we're stuck between a rock and a hard place, right? The RSF has done unspeakable acts over the last 400 days, to the Sudanese people primarily, right? One of the things that we try to dispel is that I think mainstream news presents the war in Sudan as a war between SAF and the RSF. But really this war is against the Sudanese people. The RSF has made that clear from day one, right? Entering neighborhoods, mass killing and looting of homes, all of that. This is the gratuitous violence. You can find that anywhere. I don't really want to present it here because it's easy to find literally anywhere. There are Human Rights Watch reports on this, the ethnic cleansing in West Sudan that they committed from June of 2023 all the way through to August or October. All of that you can find very easily. I don't want to talk about it. But what's been clear from day one is that we are the targets. Sudanese civilians are the targets, right? For the RSF in particular. Now, for SAF, we might not be the direct targets, but we are definitely collateral damage that doesn't really faze them. That is in the use of fighter jets and airstrikes from day one of the war in Khartoum, a heavily populated capital city, right? The fact that your first go-to is to bomb from the air, that tells me, that reflects a carelessness, a lack of consideration for civilian life, right? There's no other way around it. There wasn't really much on the ground, like troop to troop fighting, as much as there was in those first days, just raining bombs on Khartoum. So, yeah, that's the rock and the hard place, right? Nobody supports the RSF. No Sudanese civilian at this point supports the RSF after what they've seen from them over the last 400 days. And many people support SAF, some out of, true sort of allegiance or belief in the Sudanese military's mandate to protect the people, and some out of obligation, I think, just because this is the lesser of the two evils at this point. This is, at least they're a legitimate institution. You know, the RSF are a rebel militia, although that's up for argument as well. And some of us, I think maybe a minority of us, don't support either, have very large issues with both institutions, and see that we're not being protected. Sudanese people are not being protected.
Is there a third option?
Well, here's the thing, right? During the revolution and after, the discussion was always, or the demand, I should say, was always for the rapid support forces to be dismantled and for the military institution to be reformed. I think most Sudanese people believe in, obviously, the need for a military, but it needs to be a national military whose interests are not tied to itself, but to the people, right? That's always been the issue. That the military's interests, first and foremost, are to itself, to its own protection, and the protection of its interests before the people's. And that's why you see these decades of violent oppression, these decades of siphoning of national resources, making for a very fragile state, very fragile national infrastructure, but a very rich military leadership, right? I mean, wealthy. I mean, disgustingly wealthy. And this militarized state is not just in terms of it's not just enriching the military, because the military, we discovered now, is very weak in comparison, for example, to the RSF. I'm talking about foot soldiers, right? Lower ranks don't really have that support of their leadership. They're not really paid well. The weapons are outdated as compared to the RSF, for example. But the military leadership and that police state of an intelligence service and a secret police and all of that, those things, that leadership really gained a lot, and political leadership really gained a lot over the last 30 years personally, right, for their personal gain. And so our demand as a people who came out to protest against this militarized state is that we want a military that knows its job. Its job is to protect Sudan from outside forces, right, from outside dangers, that it has no more involvement in politics, in the economy. We don't want that. We want you to just be in your barracks and do your job. And we want the RSF to be dismantled. And so even now, people still argue that even people who support the military now, right? Like the people I said who support it out of obligation or out of sense of like, this is the lesser of two evils. Their argument has been, we'll deal with them later, right? We'll deal with the military institution later. Right now we have to end this, whatever this is. The RSF, we have to get them out of the way. And then we'll deal with the reform of the military institution and making it into a national military and all of that. So ideally, the third option is a civilian government that has nothing to do with the military, right? A civilian government that is elected, that represents the people, a parliament, all of that, all of the makings of a democratic government. That's ideally the third option. But right now, I think if you ask a lot of Sudanese people, they'll say, we'll take the military over the RSF, for sure.
So in the introduction, we kind of mentioned that oftentimes when you talk about Sudan and the conflict that's going on, a lot of people's maybe first perception is like, what's new is just they're fighting each other.
Mm-hmm.
But now that I'm thinking of it, like someone might argue, isn't it Sudanese people fighting each other currently now? So what would you say to that if someone just says, okay, this does sound like they're fighting each other and Sudanese people should be able to help themselves?
I would say on the surface, I don't blame you for thinking that. On the surface, that's what it looks like. Sudanese people fighting amongst themselves. But really, unfortunately, it's not that. It's much more insidious than that. It's the fact that, for example, the RSF is actively supported, funded, weaponized by the UAE, right? This is something that has been proven. I mean, there's a UN investigation on this that proved that the UAE is providing weapons to the RSF in exchange for gold, right? There's been reports, I think in the Wall Street Journal as well, there's a very big report about this exchange of gold for weapons and how gold is being smuggled out of Sudan, how weapons are being brought into Sudan through Chad, all of that. So the UAE is their prime backer. You also have Russia's Wagner that has been, like I said before, a long-term partner of the RSF. They are also providing assistance, weapons to the RSF, have provided weapons to the RSF. On the other hand, you have SAF, who is being backed by Egypt, it's being backed by Russia as well, in a very strange, like double-sided thing where the Russian government is actually came to Port Sudan, which is now the new capital of Sudan, to meet with Sudanese leadership and talk about Russia's support for Sudan. But on the other hand, you have Wagner, their paramilitary section that is supporting the RSF. What is happening in Sudan right now is a fight for power between two generals, but it's also a fight for control from outside forces. People want to control the Red Sea. They want to control Sudan's resources of oil, of gold, of all the sorts of minerals that we have. All these natural resources are of great importance to foreign powers. Russia used Sudan's gold to float its currency when the war with Ukraine started, and sanctions were levied against Russia. It was Sudan's gold that kept the ruble afloat. So you can just imagine how much is being stolen out of Sudan. And with a war, I mean, this war is not just between the Sudanese people. Absolutely not. Everything that we have seen, first of all, in terms of this war carrying on for so long, continuing for over a year, this is not just local efforts. This is definitely, you're getting funding from somewhere else to continue this war. There's so much out there I talked about this briefly earlier. For 30 years we've had, or just say even the last 10 or 15, right? We've had Gulf countries, namely the UAE and Saudi Arabia, Qatar as well, that has that has used Sudan for agricultural land, right? Saudi has a famous contract with the Sudanese government to lease agricultural land for 99 years. And in the revolution, that was one of the things that revolutionaries were talking about. We want to end that contract. You want to use our land? Let's get a fairer deal than 99 years of you using our agricultural land to feed your people, right? While people in Sudan go through a hunger crisis, because there were many parts of Sudan going through a hunger crisis. So world powers have a lot to gain from Sudan and have had a lot to gain from Sudan. And now whoever wins is their key to Sudan, key to the Red Sea, right? We saw what the Houthis did in blocking part of the Red Sea and what that did to the world in terms of like world shipping and import and export and whatever. Imagine having control over the Red Sea through Sudan. That means having control over the Middle East. It's huge, right? It's huge. So there have been powers vying for control of different parts of Sudan's wealth, national wealth, for a long time. And this war gives them the perfect opportunity to now see it through to the end, because whoever wins obviously will promise them that, right? Whoever you back, if they win, you get what you want. The UAE is getting what it wants right now with this gold and all that.
I mean, I don't know if you'll be able to answer this question, but like, why are we allowing them to use us like this? I mean, it probably goes back to centuries, but it just sounds like there's so much use and manipulation from above, quote unquote. But like, I'm just thinking, if we hone this power within ourselves, and you just mentioned just about the Red Sea and the minerals, the power we could have just within Sudan, not even alone the whole of Africa. Do you know how much power Sudan could have in itself?
Yeah,
Why? Surely we're not just like the only one who can see it, right? This must
absolutely
be.
not. I mean, it's a really hard question to answer, to be honest. I think the wrong answer that, in my opinion, that people give is African leaders don't care about their countries. African leaders are always going to be corrupt and self-serving. That to me is the wrong answer, because it inherently puts the blame on Africanness, as if it's like a uniquely African thing to be corrupt, to exploit, uh, to be self-centered and self-serving. I think that's a human trait. We see it everywhere. I mean, we see it in the countries that we live in now. I am a U.S. citizen, and I see the self-servingness of U.S. politicians. Absolutely. So I think it's a human trait. Unfortunately, I think this might be a hot take, so don't cancel me. But I think we have been, so many of us, or so many of our leaders, came from humble beginnings. And I think power and wealth really does something to a person. If you're not strong within yourself, uh, if you're not robust within your heart, I think it can really do a number on a person. And having decades long, complete, total power over a people, over a land and its resources, I don't know what that does to a person. I don't know, but I think it's, I think anybody, I mean, Bashir was president for 30 years, 3 decades of doing whatever you want with impunity, right? Without having to go through an election or or have questions answered, because the power of the state is behind you. And I also think that this is not a conspiracy theory. It's the truth that world powers benefit from that greed and that self-centeredness of those leaders. They handpick them. And we've seen throughout Africa's history how the US and Europe have interfered in African affairs in order to get the person they want, the person they think serves them best. It doesn't happen on its own. It's not just Africans electing the wrong people or Africans allowing the wrong people to rule them. I think those wrong people are either positioned to get into power or propped up by other forces that are beyond us. And I think also the narrative that like we just sit back and take it is something that also is very widespread. Even in my comment section today, well, the Sudanese people need to really stand up for themselves and revolt. There needs to be a revolution to happen within the Sudanese people. Why are you guys just sitting back and letting this happen to you? We did it. We didn't. Sudan has at least 4 revolutions in its back pocket since 1960. We've
don't know
been doing
anything
this.
about Sudan, just say so.
Right, exactly. Just say that. We have been, African people have been fighting for their freedom, for their right to self-rule, for their right to determine what happens to them and to their countries. But we also have hundreds of years of subjugation and exploitation to contend with. That doesn't end overnight. It doesn't end overnight. And especially it doesn't end overnight when you have other powers actively fighting against your liberation. You just can't, right? So, yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but I think we don't give ourselves, no, I think the world doesn't give us enough credit, and we don't know enough about ourselves to give ourselves that credit either of like, no, we have been fighting really hard for a very long time. And maybe, I mean, this is why I think I appreciate what's happening now in terms of this like global solidarity with Palestine and people recognizing how their governments are complicit in what's happening to Palestinian people. Because the same applies for us. Your governments are complicit in what is happening to African people. And when people start to realize that and start to acknowledge it truly and fight against it, that's when we have a fighting chance. But right now we're fighting our own oppressors and the people backing them by ourselves. And that's just it's not feasible. It's not feasible in my opinion.
So, I mean, I guess my next question was going to be about the future. Any predictions? I mean, again, I don't know if you'll be able to answer this question a bit big questions, but what do you think this is going to end, or do you think there's any agreements that are coming soon, peacekeeping agreements? What do you think the future holds?
I laugh because over the last year there have been maybe 10, maybe 10, maybe a little less, this ceasefire agreements
Mm.
that have been immediately broken by both sides. I personally, and I mean, even now, like 2 days ago, the U.S. envoy to Sudan announced that, because they had been announcing there were negotiations in Jeddah and Saudi Arabia since the beginning of the war, brokered by the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. And we've all been saying, this isn't going to work. They're not about stopping. They don't care. They're not going to stop. And of course, Sunni people were not listened to. And so over the last 3 weeks or so, they've been, announcing or being like, okay, negotiations are about to start up again. We've sent an invitation to both sides and we're going to start negotiations within the next 2 weeks, And 2 days ago, the U.S. envoy, made an announcement and said that negotiations are not going to happen. We sent an invitation to both sides and neither has agreed to come sit at the table. So it's looking bleak right now. I won't lie to you. It's looking like this war is going to continue for some time, especially since these forces that are backing both sides, or particularly the RSF right now, I think so many people, experts, not just regular folks, but like experts have argued that if pressure is placed upon the UAE to cease its support for the RSF, the war will end, right? They are the primary backer of the RSF. And the RSF is the primary aggressor in this war. If you stop giving them weapons, it will end, right? The war will have to come to an end. But there isn't enough pressure on the UAE to do so, right? The UAE, of course, denies its involvement, says that they're not supplying weapons to the RSF, even though it's proven that they are. And the UAE's primary ally, being the US, doesn't even bring them up. They just don't want to get involved there because that ruins their interests with the UAE, particularly as it pertains to Israel. So, it's a difficult situation. We're still stuck in that rock and a hard place as Sudanese people. And in the meantime, we are carrying the weight of the humanitarian response as Sudanese people, carrying it for ourselves. Earlier, you asked, or you mentioned like how people might be wondering what Africans are doing for themselves or what Sudanese people are doing for themselves. This is what we're doing for ourselves. We are carrying the humanitarian response. The first 6 to 8 months of the war, the bulk of the humanitarian response was through the diaspora, which was funneling money into Sudan so that emergency response rooms, volunteers on the ground could take care of their communities because there was no access for humanitarian organizations. Well, humanitarian organizations left. The UN left when the war began. And some abandoned their local staff in a war zone. And so when it came time to come back, they found it very difficult to get visas, to get permission to come back in the country. And also the places that need the most help are active war zones. And humanitarian corridors have not been created, even though there were repeated demands for them, both by the people and by the world. But it didn't happen. It hasn't happened. Humanitarian aid is trickling into these places. And in the absence of it, Sudanese people have carried that weight. We have been doing for ourselves this whole time. Local initiatives, volunteer organizations, local registered organizations have stepped up to carry that, feeding people, treating them, evacuating people out of war zones who needed, finding them to like get to safer places in Sudan. For the people who say that Sudanese people are looking for a handout or Sudanese people are Africans are waiting to be saved, that is not the case. But after a year of supporting our families who are on the ground, who don't have a source of income anymore, who don't have a home anymore, some of them, who need help, supporting our families on the ground, supporting our families who may have fled to other countries but still don't have a source of income, cannot get settled in these new places because they don't have a status. And so that has fallen on the diaspora, right? So carrying that weight and also funding and supporting initiatives on the ground for the millions of people who are still trapped in these war zones and outside of them who need our help. All of that has been carried by the Sudanese diaspora. So when you see these local initiatives that we're sharing, this is who you need to support. If you care about Sudan and care about humanity, this is who you need to support.
That kind of leads quite well into my question onto what do you think people like us should be doing? What's the next steps?
I think first and foremost, researching how your countries of residence or citizenship are complicit in supporting or normalizing what's happening in Sudan. How they've supported, or how their support has led to what's happening today, and how their lack of action or maybe their adverse action has led to this continuing. That's one. And two, dismantling whatever preconceived notions you may have about Africa, about struggle in Africa, about conflict in Africa. It never happens in a vacuum. This war in Sudan is not happening in a vacuum, and neither is any conflict on the African continent. What's happening in the DRC is not happening in a vacuum. It is not Congolese doing it to themselves, or Congolese and Rwandans, Africans within themselves doing it to themselves, right? Dismantling those preconceived notions, that unconscious bias that you might have about the African continent, really goes a long way towards just having any sort of feeling about what's happening to Sudan, or any other place in the world, really, right? Because we work our minds work on that unconscious bias. And I don't blame anybody for having that. I think we all have it. We're all fighting. So dismantling that within ourselves, I think, is very important. And on a less like intangible note, on a more practical note, if you can, supporting Sudanese people by supporting these local initiatives, these fundraisers that we share, by showing up to the protests. You don't know what it does for us, for our morale, first and foremost, right? We are really struggling to keep hopeful, but also to keep pushing in our work. And having that public support, or having that comment from someone that says, I see you, that really goes a long way. So it's not just about money. You know, a lot of people think that this is just about money. Oh, the only way I can support is through fundraising, is through donating, but I can't afford to. That's fine. Showing up, sharing the information out of Sudan, um, you know, all that engagement that you do online, it goes a long way, because it's not just about the person whose post you're commenting on. It's also that with your engagement, the algorithm pushes out that information. I think we all have a role to play, and no role is too small. It just is a question of trying to figure out where we fit in this global movement. Don't wait for somebody to tell you what to do. There are ways to find out what to do. You know what you're capable of, what your skill set is, what you have, what your capabilities are.
But that was super like insightful, and I think really important conversation to have. I think it's like I said, it's one thing to kind of see a video that might be on Instagram, which is just a shorter nature, quick info bits and very infographic.
Mm-hmm.
But like you swipe it away and you kind of like move along with your day. But I think even just for myself, not even to the listener, it was so like important for myself to just get that from a person that is Sudanese and actually knows what they're talking about and understands it. And I think everyone should just listen to it and also do their research. And like you've said, don't take her word for it. Do some research. If she mentioned
Yeah.
anything that you don't agree with or you agree with and you want to find out more, do your research. She's
Very big
mentioned
on do your research. Don't take my word for it. I am just one person in a sea of Sudanese people with a sea of opinions and perspectives. A lot of people disagree with me. A lot of people disagree with my take on things. A lot of Sudanese people disagree with me. So I always say that. Don't take my word for it. Go research. Go listen to other people who are talking about this. Read the comment section. People come for me in the comment section all the time. I'm just one person. I think when we also are just always looking for a spokesperson, and that's not a thing, right? Societies are multifaceted, multidimensional, with a variety of perspectives. You can't just look at one person and be like, that's the story, that's it, right? Because maybe I'm not giving you the whole story. Maybe I'm just giving you my side or from my lived experience. But maybe somebody from another part of Sudan can give you a whole other perspective.
That
So,
even plays into the fact that Sudan and Africa is not one. We're not just a
yes,
one color. You can't paint us with the same brush. And like
absolutely.
yeah, as you said, you're just one person out of Sudan is one of the biggest country in Africa. So let's not even talk about how many other opinions there are. But as long as you
Absolutely.
try, yeah, just like you said, do your research, have a look. Obviously, this is very important and it's affecting millions of people. And we pray for some type of peacekeeping, some type of
Yes.
ceasefire
Come.
agreement soon that actually values the people and what they want to know. Yeah. Is there any last things that I might never have asked, or any other points that you wanted to raise that you didn't? before we close?
No, I think I'm sorry for talking so much, and I felt like I went on tangents sometimes, but I just really want to thank you again for organizing this and for choosing to speak about Sudan. Um, I think this dialogue between African people is very important, especially for us as Sudanese, because we've been isolated from the African continent for a very long time. You know, our overlords have wanted us to identify more with the Middle East and the Arab parts of our culture and our identity a lot more than the African. And so as a result, we've been very isolated from Africa. So it feels good to have this conversation with a fellow African. It feels good to be recognized. And to make those connections. I really appreciate you for that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming and joining and speaking. Honestly, I'm going to add your socials in the episode description. Please do follow her and just like keep in contact, keep up to date with what she says. She's very frequent on her page, so do check it out. Thank you very much for listening. Please do remember to leave a review, like, share with your community. I really appreciate it, and it does help to get our voices out there. This has been Sòrò, sókè, an independent production brought to you by yours truly, Zaynob. Thank you very much, and see you next time.